Let's talk again about Texas. I feel like Ryan Walters left Oklahoma and now everything shifts to Texas again. The state of Texas is suing one of its own school districts for following the law. And they don't like that in Texas. So that's where this story is going. And it basically centers around this dude right here. This is Ken Paxton, the most controversy plagued Republican in a party full of them. But he's the Attorney General of Texas. He's the guy filing this lawsuit. And what this story is all about is, as I've talked about many times on this channel, Texas passed a law saying public schools have to put up posters of the 10 Commandments. KJV version, everyone has to do it. There's also a provision in the law that says if your school district gets sued over it, Ken Paxton's going to represent you for free, which is a way of saying taxpayers will be on the hook if anyone tries to fight this. And I'm not going to rehash everything, but here's the quick version of it. There was a lawsuit over that bill. Like a dozen families from 11 different school districts, they said, hey, if my school district puts up the 10 Commandments posters, it will violate the constitutional rights of my kids to be able to go to a neutral school where religion isn't thrust upon them. And this past August, a federal judge said, you're right, church-state separation groups. So I'm not ready with my complete ruling yet, but I am definitely going to hit pause. The school districts, the 11 school districts mentioned in this lawsuit, you cannot put up the 10 Commandments posters. And everyone else, like, wait for my ruling. And since then, the two sides have been fighting this insane war where everyone's trying to analyze what the school districts should do. So, for example, Ken Paxton wrote a letter to all these school districts in the state saying, well, those 11 school districts aren't allowed to put up the posters, but the rest of you need to do it now. And the church-state separation groups wrote a letter to the school districts saying, hey, we already won in court with these 11 school districts. If any of you put up these posters, we're going to come after you too. And by the way, not that long ago, the church-state separation crowd filed another lawsuit, identical to the first one, saying we have like another 14 school districts that are violating the law. Hey, judge, can you step in and stop this? And the judge said, I don't know if the judge has ruled on those 14 yet, but presumably the judge will hit pause on those 14 districts as well. But you imagine, you can understand the bad position this puts all these school districts in, because the state is telling them to put up these Christian displays. The federal law says those displays are blatantly illegal because they're promoting Christianity. And conservatives keep saying we're appealing all these decisions every single time because they're like the 10 Commandments. It's a part of American history. That's not what this is all about at all. And here's where we're at now. Already, the state has filed an appeals for appeal with the Fifth Circuit, which is notoriously conservative, but the 17 judges on the Fifth Circuit, they said we will take up all these cases in Texas and Louisiana, and I think they're going to hear that case in January. So right now, everybody is in a holding pattern. We're waiting for the judges to weigh in. I hope that Fifth Circuit will say, yeah, this is religion. You can't promote religion. Don't do this. But who knows? But anyway, Ken Paxton doesn't want to wait for a ruling. He wants every school to put up the posters anyway. And I think they figured out, the Republicans figured out how to do it. And here's what they're doing. In September, there is a Christian nationalist state senator named Mays Middleton. He's awful. I've mentioned him a few times on here. One of these Christian right guys who just files everything to exalt Jesus and does nothing for the people. He donated 10 Commandments displays to the Galveston Independent School District. I don't know if that's his home school district or what, but he donated hundreds of posters. And by Texas law, if someone donates posters to you, you are required to put them up if you haven't done so already. And so what happened? Well, after he donated those posters, there was a school board meeting a couple of weeks ago in Galveston. And check out what happened here. Um, I will scroll down to 7D. Look at this right over here. We will discuss and consider delaying posting of the 10 Commandments donated posters until this issue is resolved by the Fifth Circuit. That's what they wanted to do. And you can even see, if I can pull this up here, what did they finally decide? This was very quick. Whoops. But look at the recommendation at the bottom. This is from one of the school board members. I recommend district administration delay the posting of the donated 10 Commandments posters until the courts figure this one out, which sounds like a very responsible thing for the school district to do. Because if I'm reading that correctly, the school district is saying, we don't want to get involved in any legal battles. We don't want to get sued. So right now, someone in the state gave us these posters, which we're supposed to put up by Texas law, but federal law says don't put up those posters. What do we do? And this board member says, why don't we just hold off doing anything until the courts weigh in on this case, which again, sounds reasonable. Well, look at what Ken Paxton is doing now. And this is disturbing. Attorney General Ken Paxton sues Galveston ISD after it refused to display the 10 Commandments in classrooms. And look at what he says here. This is, by the way, again, the most corrupt, vile dude in the state whose wife divorced him on biblical grounds. Those are the words she used. And this guy who is notoriously corrupt, what does he say? America is a Christian nation, and it is imperative that we display the very values and timeless truths that have historically guided the success of our country. By refusing to follow the law, Galveston ISD chose to both blatantly ignore the legislature and also ignore the legal and moral heritage of our nation. First of all, by refusing to follow the law, they are following the law. The law currently says the 10 Commandments by themselves, posting them in a public place is illegal. It's illegal when the government does it because it's a promotion of Christianity. That's what the law is. So they are following the law. And it also says they're ignoring the legislature. Yeah, because the legislature isn't following the law. So they're right to ignore you. And he says they're ignoring the legal and moral heritage of our nation. No, there's no legal heritage that involves the 10 Commandments. That's why most of the 10 Commandments are not laws. This has been litigated repeatedly. Anyone who's read the 10 Commandments, which is usually not Christians, could tell you why this stuff, like respect your parents, that might be good life advice. That's not a law. Take a day of rest on the Sabbath. That's definitely not a law. So there's no legal basis for it. And if we're talking about the moral heritage of our nation, well, our nation began with slavery. So there's your moral heritage right there. What the hell is Paxton talking about? And then what else does he say? There is no valid legal basis to prevent Texas schools from honoring a foundational framework of our laws. There is, especially under the misconception that a separation of church and state phrase appears in the Constitution. It does not. Oh my God, I can't believe we're still doing this. Yeah, the phrase is not in the Constitution, but that is how courts have interpreted the Establishment Clause for decades now. No religious test for public office. You have a right to your faith. You have freedom of religion, freedom from religion. All of this has been verified and confirmed by so many courts for so many decades now. No one is arguing that the only reason we believe in separation of church and state is because the Constitution says it. No one has ever said that. Ken Paxton is dumb. So he's suing over this. And if you look at the lawsuit, this is maybe the weirdest part about it right here. Look at number 37. The only injury the Galveston School District may incur in coming into compliance with Texas law. If we make this school district put up the 10 commandments, the worst that would happen is that they would have to display the 10 commandments in Galveston ISD classrooms. This injury, if it can be called such, is negligible compared to the injury incurred by the state of Texas in one of its subdivisions openly flouting Texas law. So, in other words, if the worst thing that happens here is this school district puts up the 10 commandments, they're saying, who cares? That's not a big deal. You know what is a big deal? Not listening to what religious demagogues say in the Texas legislature. This treatment of a school district by the Attorney General of the state who hates public schools is so offensive to me. And again, Texas law here doesn't matter because there's a federal law that supersedes it, which is something a lawyer, you would think, might know. So that's what Ken Paxton's doing. He's going after school districts just to stick it to them because he hates them. So here's what I'm afraid of. I don't know that this lawsuit's going to go anywhere because the courts, again, have said school districts do not have to put this up. But I do wonder, Mays Middleton donated those posters to this school district, and now Ken Paxton, his buddy, is like, all right, this district needs to put up these posters because we gave them to you. So what's stopping Middleton from sending these posters to every district in the state that hasn't put them up yet and isn't involved in a lawsuit yet? And then Ken Paxton piggybacking on that and filing lawsuits all over the state. I'm sure he wants to. He doesn't like any of these school districts. And I'm not even giving them ideas. I'm sure they've thought all this through. The only thing I don't get is why they only have gone after Galveston right now. I don't know. This is just the latest way Texas Republicans are waging a war against public education. They've already tried to whitewash history. They've already tried to whitewash science, climate change, vaccines, all that stuff. They won't rest until they have replaced actual education with the sort of shit you learn in Sunday school. And even if the courts rule against Paxton in this case, which should be a no-brainer, all of this is a waste of time for the district, which now has to defend itself against this stuff. And instead of focusing on the kids, they got to devote resources to fighting their own attorney general. It sounds like Texas has decided the worst thing about its public education system are all the damn students and teachers and administrators who make it operate. So let's make life tougher for them. I mean, it's such a horrible... It's unfair that the school district has to choose between angering Ken Paxton or violating the Bill of Rights. It's a political minefield created by Republicans. It's not even about the 10 Commandments anymore. Ken Paxton just wants control of these school districts. And they're going to force teachers and students to affirm this Christian theology that many of them don't share. Even if they're Christian, they don't want this going up. That's how insecure Republicans are. They can't win people over. They can't win anyone over with their ideas because their ideas suck. So they try to force it on everybody. They can't win votes in fair districts. So what did they do in Texas? They rigged the maps and gerrymandered the entire state. What do they do when kids aren't growing up thinking they're heroes? Well, they weaponize children's education to try to make them think differently. Let's pledge allegiance to the flag. I think in Texas, all the public schools have to pledge a different allegiance to the Texas flag. It's all a waste of time. And it is telling that Ken Paxton's version of Christian nationalism involves coercion, threats, lawsuits, lies. That is what his Christian religion teaches him to do. And every hour that these districts spend fending off Ken Paxton is another hour stolen from the kids that they are supposed to be helping. So I don't know. Unless Texas voters ever decide they're sick of this shit, it's going to keep happening. They have a choice. They can vote against this stuff if they ever came to their senses. And by they, I mean the 52% of Texas who are Republicans. All these people, they always win with 50 some percent of the vote, and then they govern like they won with 99% of the vote. Same in Florida. All right, I'll stop there with this story. What questions we got? I wish they would spend that energy on educating kids. Sorry, not in Texas, not what they do there. They do that in a lot of blue states, though. Ken Paxton is literally wasting taxpayer money to go after taxpayer money, wasting taxpayer resources on two fronts. No kidding. All these it is amazing. All these Republicans are like, we got to save money. That's why we can't feed poor people. But they'll spend. What was it? I read that it cost $2 billion, B with a B, to change the Department of Defense to the Department of War. But because Pete Hegseth is like, that makes me sound cooler, they'll spend $2 billion for that. But they won't actually try to help people with it, because that's how Republicans and the white evangelicals and Southern Baptists who support them, none of this bothers them. None of this bothers them enough. I'm Hulana of Texas, and I do not approve of this use of my tax dollars. Thank you, Hulana. I hope you vote. And I hope you vote against every Republican on your ballot. I don't care who the Democrats are at this point. Thanks for becoming a YouTube member, Luck Dragon. Thanks for that donation. It is fun for me to be reminded how I once held these same religious views of government in my early years. I was around 26 or 28 when I finally came to my sanity, and 29 when I knew I was atheist. Well, good for you. And I'm always very impressed by people who change their religious beliefs or like become vegetarians when they are like way past high school, college, all that stuff. Because I feel like that's a lot harder to do as you get older. Not that you're alone on this. There are a lot of people who have done that, but I'm so curious to learn what it was that made you decide to make that switch. But good for you. Thank you so much.